We've got a new van here from the police. There's no chance you can turn the engine off, is there? You got a leak as well. Got a leak at the bottom there. So this is a new van from the police. Watching over the speakers corner. You might remember a little incident like a couple of weeks ago. And it's, look, they got these bits of kit on top. Cameras. This is a new police van. Huh?
Why are they filming Speaker's Corner?
I don't know. They've just been told to do it. Yeah, I mean they're not an issue though, are they? So it's just they got a new type of van, a new type of it's a new type in blue. It's got the look, signs on the back. Nothing on the back. Oh no, they've got a camera there as well. Look, see. Yeah, that's the new camera. They got new speakers.
Heike, what I wanted to ask
spotters.
You. Heike, what I wanted to ask you.
Okay, this is the Speakers Corner show, 24th of April, second start. Unfortunately, someone said something that might be, might fit one of the mad categories of the forbidden zone. And I'll try and avoid that at the Speakers Corner show. A bit later on, people will be speaking. Those things might appear. It's our Catholic Evidence Guild friend.
Talking about, what a man is and what a woman is, they'll be round your house like a shot. Like a shot. So, if you're burgled, here's the thing to do. If you're burgled, you want a copper to come to your house. Say, I'm actually, my name's George, and I wear a dress, and this man's broke into my house and insulted me, and he's stolen all my stuff. The coppers will be round like a shot. I'm telling you. So our coppers, we talked about our coppers at the beginning. We need a reformation of the coppers. That's what we need. I won't go into any more detail than that.
You sound like Martin Luther of the police force.
Yeah.
But you're supposed to be Catholic.
Yeah, that's right. I know. I end up talking about the coppers because, there's things they get up to. I know you know that from your particular point of view. But from our point of view as well, as Catholics, they get up to all kinds of stuff which we think is a little bit dodgy. So anyway, never mind that. What I was saying here, before you came with your camera, was that we Christians
You got one there.
Have the power. Yeah, I know, but I can control where that goes.
Okay.
We Catholics,
This is a light show.
all right. We Catholics, I was saying, we Catholics have the latent power, according to Jesus in this anyway, to heal the sick, raise the dead, to cast out demons. You don't see many Catholics doing that. And so one could say, either this is false, or we're pretty poor examples of Christians. So we got to meditate on that and do what we can. Because we believe we got to do what we can to do what this says we can do. And that means getting our faith strengthened. Because he says in here, our Lord, we just need faith the size of a mustard seed. But we have to counter that. If we have that faith the size of a mustard seed, we just got to cancel out these doubts. This constant doubting which comes to us from our life in modern England.
Doubting of what, sorry?
Oh, doubt, well, like he says, if you say to this tree, wither away and die, as Jesus said, and it will die. But if we doubt it when we say it won't happen. Jesus says, if you say something...
Well, it'll eventually wither away, won't it?
Yeah, but this is him saying it and it causing it to wither away. He said it within 24 hours. Now, he says, if you say it without doubting in your heart that it will happen, then it will happen. But if there's doubt in your heart, it won't happen. So we Catholics, we're full of doubts. We doubt the Bible, we doubt everything. In fact, we're all brought up in the same culture. It's a culture where you're supposed to be sceptical about things, question things.
Okay, that's a big jump though, you don't mind me saying, from the withering of the tree as a doubt factor to Catholics generally having doubts.
Oh yeah, it's basically this, that faith is one thing we've got to have as Catholics, but we won't be able to, say somebody's sick, say our mum is dead sick. we can. Jesus has promised us that we can pray for her, and she'll be healed. But he also says, if you doubt in your heart that this can really happen, it will not work. She will not be healed. So we've got to do what we can.
Doesn't that risk creating like a trauma in someone's mind? Let's say the mother does die,
Yeah.
and someone has no doubt
Yeah.
that they would cure that they would be able to pray to God and something should happen, and they all get around in a congregation to do that,
Yes.
and it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Doesn't that undermine their faith?
Yes.
And illegitimately, perhaps?
Yeah. You've got a very good point. Because the promise is not that anything we ask for will be given. It's got to be in accord with the will of God. He is standing there. It seems pretty clear. There are certain people he definitely will cure if we exercise our faith. Now, that doesn't mean at everyone. And what we've got to do is, at one hand, believe that if it really is his will, it will happen. But then if it doesn't happen, we examine ourselves to see whether we had doubts. But if after examining ourselves we find that we didn't have any doubt at all, and yet they died, we must say that was God's will then, not for this person to survive. Because it could be like she's very elderly and it's just time.
Isn't that the recipe for the famous Catholic guilt syndrome? Isn't that the recipe for that?
Yeah,
though?
yeah, it is. Catholic guilt, though, is generally people who are on like Radio 4 who say, I was a Catholic and I freed myself from Catholic guilt. When I used to listen to Radio 4, this was a regular thing I picked up. Catholic guilt is where people who are now following an un-Catholic lifestyle want to say they suffered because they were subject to Catholic guilt. We would say Catholic guilt was healthy. It was where you believed in the 10 Commandments and that you must not do certain things, like you must not have sex outside of marriage, or if you're married you must not get divorced, or you must not have an affair outside your marriage.
Okay, but you're extending that onto the doubt question. That's why if you have the faith that X will happen because you prayed hard enough for it, and then it doesn't happen, isn't that then a recipe for instilling a sort of psychology of guilt in the mind of the person, assuming things go wrongly?
If there are all kinds of possibilities of a person's mind becoming troubled in this religion, in all versions, all religions, but particularly in Christianity. The key thing is to counsel people about these matters. So for me, I would never have a guilt trip if I pray for someone and they didn't get well or they died, because as I've explained it to you, perhaps inadequately to whatever degree, I understand that my prayer may not get the results that I wanted to get. It may be that I had all the faith I needed to have. It may be that I didn't. But if I did, if I come away thinking, I had enough faith, yet that person wasn't cured, then I'm not going to be guilt tripped. I'm going to think I didn't appreciate God's will for that person. That the will for that person was not then that they come out of this illness.
Okay. Thanks very much.
All right.
You're very useful.
Where did you get that?
Yes, sir.
Tell me.
From Afghanistan.
Yeah. What are you standing for? I did interview once before, but I'll just do it once more. What are you sitting here for? What happens when you sit here?
To publicize this American 20 years, kill 1 million people for nothing. After Bin Laden, there's an Al-Qaeda. The trade center has been destroyed by Saudi Arabia. And they can't come Afghanistan because rich of minerals. American come for this drug, opium and minerals. Rich of minerals contain the world.
So what do you think is happening in Afghanistan? Is that connected anyway?
Everything normal, safe, beautiful, all the ways when the Taliban government come. Before it was puppet government, so this is the bloody bush. When they come for killing, 1 million people they kill.
Yeah, the Ukrainian thing, is that connected?
No.
In your mind?
No, maybe they hired America now pay money, some Afghans, puppet Afghans, to pay money to fight in Ukraine. against Russia.
You know,
This is American, the rough, the dirty, the bastard policy of American government. Public,
Okay.
we have no concern with the public, or maybe go, but government is nasty. Look, she's the flag. He has demolished Russia. Will destroy it in 10 states. American will be also demolished. Look, what demolished?
okay, what's your name?
Here is my name is. This is Guantanamo.
Guantanamo
This is
Bay,
human
yeah.
being.
Yeah.
This is Berlin Wall. Who demolished the Berlin Wall? We
Yeah.
have one demolished. We have 5,000 years. We are engraved three countries: UK, United States, and Russia. Look, the bloody Russia. Communism won't anymore. No anymore communism.
Okay, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
You know, it says in the Quran, all blessings, good things, come from Allah. So why is Israel blessed beyond belief? And look at all the countries around them. A backward, godforsaken mess. Where they're killing each other. Sunni killing Shia. Shia killing Sunni. They're both killing the Kurds and the Yazidis. The Christians are trying to get out. They're a godforsaken people. But if they return to their Quran, and you know it even says in their Quran, if your enemy leans toward peace, you also lean toward peace and rely on Allah. But they won't go and make peace, they won't go negotiate.
Brother, can I say
So they're in a right mess of their own making.
Do you believe debate and conversation?
I'm
let
the
me say
speaker's
something.
corner on a ladder. I'm allowed to talk.
Let me say something.
And I do talk. And it's important people hear both sides of the story. He wants you only to hear him speaking. When I speak, he says, oh, brother, so everyone can get up on a ladder and say whatever they like. I want the Palestinians to have a nice life. Make peace with Israel, have two states, living happily ever after. I'd like some of those settlers to stay in Palestine because they built lots of factories. They employ tens of thousands of Palestinians in those factories. And the Palestinians said they're going to get out, and the Jews are going to get out, they'll take their factories with them and they give employment to Israelis. So it's in the interest of the Arabs to allow some Jews to stay there. And incidentally, in 1948, when the United Nations created Israel, a Jewish state and Arab state, the Arabs kicked out all the Jews from the Arab state and doesn't want any back. So when someone come back to their properties, they say, oh, you're going to get out.
Okay.
No, those Jews own their properties, been there for hundreds of years, and they've gone back to live there. Fine, I'm happy with that.
Okay, you finished?
Yeah.
So you divert the conversation somewhere else.
To reality. Yeah, to reality.
Go on.
Please let me talk. We've been talking about settlement areas. And you mentioned about... let me
I'm not
talk, let me
talking about
finish.
settlements. If you want to talk about settlements, go somewhere else. I'm talking about Israel, Palestine,
no.
making peace with each other.
No.
That's
Yeah,
what I'm talking
about peace.
You don't have to talk
I'm talking about peace.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm talking about peace. My brother, he don't want to listen. I'm talking about
And do you
peace.
know why there's a settlement? Do you know why there's an occupation? Before 1967, the Arabs had their own land. They kicked all the Jews out. But in 1967,
Palestinians poisoned, getting strangled, their families getting slaughtered in their homes. And the fact that the Russian oligarchs are dropping like flies right now shows that there's clearly dissent in Putin's inner circle even. That means that it won't take much longer for people to start saying, okay, this guy's poisoning the people who used to work for him. This guy's threatening nuclear war. What do we have to gain with that? What do we have to gain by threatening the world with nuclear war? If he actually goes for it, we're all dead. If he doesn't go for it, it's an empty threat and Russia is done for. So either way, it's a no-win situation for them. I think Putin is going to seriously start getting betrayed left, right and center very soon.
Yesterday you attended the protests outside of number 10 Downing Street. Unfortunately, as you know, I was planning to go. I decided not to go because of something else, but can you describe to me, excuse me, how that went yesterday?
Yeah, of course, of course. So the protest went pretty well, as all Ukrainian protests are very disciplined, they're very straightforward, you know, they listen to the advice of the police, they stay out of the way of the cars, and I think that's very good because it doesn't bring the public opinion against our movement. Because, look, for example, Extinction Rebellion is a bad example of this. Because, I mean, it's a good example of a bad example. It's a good example of what you should not do. They block roads, they stop traffic, they stop people from going to work, and they get hatred from the common folk who are just trying to go and get their living. Ukrainians are very different in that, and I'm very proud that they're actually doing it in a very disciplined way in that regard.
But could I come in and argue against what you're saying?
No, of course.
I agree with you.
Can and you
that-
should.
I agree with you that the Ukrainians are more disciplined in their approach. I agree with you. Where I disagree with you, Extinction Rebellion, their approach is to disrupt. When you disrupt, you get national coverage. You get their issues put in the news. And as a direct result of that, they're in the media. So if I compare what the Ukrainians have been doing, there is not as much reported locally in this country, in my opinion, as there are reported when Extinction Rebellion disrupts London like they did last week and the previous 7 days. So you can disagree with me, but I disagree. But let's not disagree on those little details. But my final question, it was mentioned yesterday that it's possible this war could go on till 2023. That's another year. What's your views on that?
I do not think it's possible it's going to go until 2023. I don't think so. I don't think so because of a few different reasons. The main reason for me is that even countries where Russia was getting some support before the war and it was implied that they would get support from them if things got sour, they're just staying on the fence. And the countries who are showing support for Russia are irrelevant, like North Korea. What difference is North Korea ever going to make? Now China is what actually matters. The way what China chooses in this situation is what's going to determine if this war goes on or if this war ends. And from what I see, China is kind of staying out of it, which is not gonna help Russia at all, and it's gonna make sure it's gonna make certain that Russia is going to lose this war a lot quicker than they would if they had China's support. I think Russia would still lose, even if China supported them. Even if they gave them their full support, they would lose.
You think Russia's going to lose?
I think they would still lose. But here's
You think they're going to lose? Yeah.
They are going to lose, and they're losing. They're losing because they lost the northern front of Ukraine. Now, the war in Ukraine had three fronts: the northern front, the eastern front, and the southern front. The eastern front has been going on there for years, for about 8 years since 2014. It's the Donbass front. So nobody expected it would move much in either direction, and it didn't. It basically remained the same. The southern front is where the Russians had the most success, because their tanks would go a bit better. There was less mud, less forests. It was easier for them. But even in the southern front, they've been pushed back a little bit. In the northern front, it was an absolute and complete catastrophe for the Russians. They had losses upon losses upon losses. And this is something I mentioned before. This is actually something very funny the Russians did. And they do it all the time. They try to cater to both sides of the argument. When they retreated, they ran with their tails between their legs from the northern front in Ukraine. On one side they said, this is a show of goodwill. We're showing goodwill, guys. We're just retreating because we don't want any war. That's baloney, because if they wanted to show goodwill, they would have stopped attacking Mariupol. They didn't stop attacking Mariupol because they were winning at Mariupol. So in the regions where they're winning, they'll keep attacking. But in the regions where they're losing, they'll show goodwill and they'll retreat. Yes, makes a lot of sense.
Unless they went to Kiev extremely rapidly, which was an option at the beginning, it was going to be a very dirty battle in Kiev. And so it seems quite logical to me that if you didn't take it in the first few days, that you withdraw from Kiev. It doesn't seem any logic to attack Kiev anymore.
Absolutely. No,
So
look, I agree.
it's not necessarily defeat then. It could be.
I agree with you if they retreated in the first few days after the first attack failed. But they didn't. They kept trying, they kept failing, they kept losing troops upon troops upon troops, thousands of Russian troops, hundreds of Russian military vehicles like tanks, transports, and all
I
kinds
don't
of
know
things.
how many.
And planes and helicopters have been lost. And this brings me to the second point of the Russians. So the first point, they say, oh, it was goodwill, it was a show of goodwill, we retreated because we wanted to show goodwill to the Ukrainians, which I disproved because, you know, they kept attacking in Mariupol where they were winning. The second option the Russians also went for is that they did a tactical retreat. And that tactical retreat happened because the attack on Kiev was only a distraction. Now this point is even worse than the first point because nobody does a distraction where they lose thousands of troops, hundreds of military vehicles, and gain basically nothing. It's less than nothing. They got a humiliating defeat. Their atrocities were shown at Bucha. The amount of people they slaughtered there, the amount of people
Do you
they
think
shot
the evidence
in the
is
back of
really
the head.
that strong for
I think
that?
the evidence is all there. I think the satellite images are there. I think there's already been investigations there. Now, again, I like to give this example. I like to compare the accusations Russians make of the Ukrainian side and what the Ukrainians say that the Russian did to the Ukrainians. On one side, imagine this: there's two men standing here. One of them stabs the other in front of every single one of us. He stabs the other and says, "No, it was that guy who stabbed him." Now we all saw that he stabbed the guy. We all seen it. It's kind of clear that he did it, but innocent until proven guilty. There still needs to be a court case. He needs to be prosecuted. He needs to be declared guilty in the court. We can't just put him in jail or kill him without, without trying him. You know what I mean? On the other side, imagine that this group of people walks in the room where there's a dead corpse, and one of the guys said it was that guy over there who killed him. It's a lot less clear who actually did it because we didn't see the act. There's less proof, simply put. Now, both cases, there needs to be a court case, there needs to be a trial, and there needs to be a decision. So again, innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite obvious whether it's true or not that, you know, it's fog of war, as you say. You know,
of course,
you throw up stories, you make people scared, you win public opinion. You know, the war is also an internet and information war, isn't it? So,
absolutely, 100%.
And you know, you're citing stats about deaths, tanks, and so on. I haven't gone into those stats. I don't know one way or another. Actually, to be honest with you, although at the beginning I thought to myself, I'll try and follow carefully what's going on, it became such a vast distinction and such a vast quantity of information coming out. I just took the attitude, I'm not going to sit here like fiddling over every single case, nor am I going to accept any of the stories as true. I mean, you might say that's
your choice.
Close my eyes and close my ears, but at the same time, I just feel it gives me a bit more objectivity to look at what's going on, because I just can't go for, oh, they're all dead, the Russians killed them, you know, with all this sort of phrases, you know, allegedly killed, or, you know what I mean, butcher of butcher, you know, all that. There's a certain point which you have to say, I mean, for me, what's the motivation?
Fine, I get your point.
Why would they do that? I'm not saying they couldn't do it,
Because,
but why?
Let me explain why they do that. And I need to explain this by giving an example of them doing a similar thing in the past. First of all, the Soviet army was very well known by everyone to commit a lot of atrocities. Now, fair point, the Germans committed a lot of atrocities.
You mean the Second World War, you mean, or
yes,
what?
Second World War. Second World War, yeah, that's what I meant, yeah. Second World War, the Germans committed a lot of atrocities. Then the Soviets went to Germany and they committed very similar atrocities to the Germans. They committed rapes, pillages, killings in Berlin when they took Berlin. Now, fair enough that the Germans committed a lot of bad things, horrible things, but still, the Americans didn't make any of that the Soviets did when the Americans came there. The British didn't commit any of those atrocities.
British maybe not,
but that
yeah.
the Soviets committed. That's the first point. Second point, a lot closer to us, the situation of Chechnya, of the Chechnya War. When the Russians started getting bombed, when their convoys started getting destroyed by the Chechen fighters, by the Chechen warriors, you know, who were giving a very strong fight against the Russian troops, Putin, who was in charge back then. By the way, this is something funny. Before Putin was in power, the previous Russian president did not do anything about Chechnya. They just kind of had a hands-off relation with Chechnya. When Putin came in charge, he immediately went, oh, okay, we gotta put them down. He sent troops to Chechnya, and when they started suffering losses to the Chechens, they completely leveled Grozny to the ground. They
Well,
shelled
it's their way of
out
fighting,
existence.
isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's their way of fighting.
Yeah.
It's their way of fighting to scare the population that they're attacking into submission.
Pulverized.
Pulverize them. To inflict so many losses, so much death and destruction and atrocities upon the population that you're attacking, so that they get so scared, they're like, oh man, I don't want to be exterminated. It's okay, I'll be with you. Just don't kill me, please. And that's exactly what they're doing in Ukraine. Look at Mariupol. Very similar situation to Grozny. Vast parts of the city, it's a bigger city than Grozny. It's a far bigger city with a vaster population. And a lot of its part was completely leveled to the ground. Let's look at Kharkiv. Very similar situation. And Bucha, again, let me just finish. I'm almost done. And Bucha is again part and parcel of this terror warfare. You kill people, you exterminate people, you execute people in front of each other, you make people scared, you make people afraid, you make them feel hopeless in the situation, and they resign, and there you go, you got victory. You know what I mean? That's their way of doing things. It's as simple as that.
So how does the West supplying vast amounts of high-grade weapons help to hinder the deaths?
Very good question.
Or is it possible that it merely exacerbates and extends the whole process?
Well, if it weren't for the supply of the West, of the weapons by the West, the Ukrainians would not be able to put a good fight through.
Right. And then what? Okay, let me just take a hypothetical. Let me take a hypothetical. Let's say the West had not sent any weapons, and Russia had conquered Kiev, conquered the other parts of the country. How would Ukrainians' response? How successful do you think they'd be in undermining the Russians as an occupier?
The Ukrainians.
So the question is,
what's the question?
would some kind of passive resistance or some kind of appeal to the ordinary soldiers not be more effective than more and more weapons in the hand of a standing army backed by NATO?
Passive resistance has been proven to be absolutely futile against Russia.
I mean,
we can see that with the Russian protests, they have been put down with brute force. They went there, they beat up the people who were protesting, they jailed them, some of them for 10 years for just speaking against the government. And it's legit. You can see that that's the law they passed.
Okay, but
right
the issue,
passive resistance is impossible.
But in the countries that were occupied by the former Soviet Union, so mainly the Russian army, there were Ukrainians, others there, they were able to drive out the Russians. So is it? Okay, not perfectly. The Russians withdrew, but I think the idea of a Russian occupation of that's what my position was at the beginning.
I see
if the Russians occupy Ukraine, if nothing was done, and then people started protesting non-stop.
If the Ukrainians were occupied,
yes, and they didn't get all the weapons from the West. Yes.
But I disagree with that. That will be a lot worse for the Ukrainians than it is now. I'll explain you why. So I'll give you a few examples why that kind of resistance against Russia is ineffective. Because you know Maidan, right? The Maidan protests, blah blah blah. The pro-Russian puppet governor in Ukraine, Yanukovych, started, having his thugs shoot the protesters, and
that's disputed. But anyway, go on.
Well,
it is disputed, but that's your view of it.
Disputed by Putin. It's
not just by Putin. It's not just by Putin, but
fair enough. Look, you can say that.
That's another discussion.
It's been kind of proven at this point. Now, I can give you a similar situation to that. Ukrainians actually succeeded in their rebellion against the pro-Russian puppet. The same situation happened in Belarus to Lukashenko. They attempted the same situation, but they were put down because Russian troops quickly were sent to. Guys, come on.
Go on.
Get a room, guys. Get a room. Get a room, all right.
Concentrate on what you're doing.
Sorry, go on.
I'm very concentrated. Anyway, coming back to the point.
Yeah.
In Belarus, they were not able to do the same thing because Russian troops were immediately sent to Minsk and to Belarus, and they immediately put down any kind of rebellions. This is common knowledge at this point. Same in Kazakhstan. In Kazakhstan, they were trying to put down their Russian-controlled puppet, and in Almaty, Russian troops invaded them quickly and put them down. So peaceful protests, peaceful attempts to change the Russian puppet presidents have failed in Kazakhstan and Belarus, and in Ukraine they only succeeded because the Ukrainians were the first ones who tried, and I think that Russians weren't able to deploy as much force to Ukraine, and also because Ukraine, fair enough, I have to say this, Ukraine has been more independent from Russia than Belarus and Kazakhstan. Belarus and Kazakhstan have been part of this trade union with Russia. They've been having closer relations with Russia. That needs to be said. So Ukraine was a little bit more independent. It had higher chances of succeeding in its insurrection against.
Okay, but what point does it end? So this guy Mersheim, I'm sure you're familiar with him. He said Mersheim, he's like an American realist professor, yeah, and he said NATO is prepared to fight. America basically is prepared to fight in Ukraine to the last Ukrainian blood.
I heard that one.
Okay, so
one.
what do you make of that? Do you think that's
Yeah,
nonsense,
but he's
or
not a
you
deputy,
think
he's an ex-deputy. He's no longer in charge.
who?
He's no longer in charge.
Who's
This
no
guy
longer
you're
in charge?
talking about.
No, he's a professor. He's an American professor. I'm sure other people have said the same thing. But essentially the point is, at what point of Western provision of resources for weapons to the Ukrainian fight against Russia, well, at what point does it become just the expenditure of Ukrainian lives in part of a geopolitical game?
So in stopping being a puppet.
I get the question. Thank you. I get the question. I don't need you to explain it to me.
Be a puppet the other side.
I get the question. Thank you. So look, first of all, it's funny that you mentioned this professor. I don't even remember his name. But I heard this example just yesterday about the last Ukrainian
blood,
or about or to the last
drop of their blood.
drop of Ukrainian blood, something like that. Now, again, he's not somebody who calls any shots in America. He's just a random person. He's not the one who makes the laws.
No, it's an observation, though.
It's an observation by a random person. I could say Putin is destroying Russia from within, and I think it's a veridic. It's a true statement. It's a fair point, exactly. But I'm not somebody with enough authority to project my opinion on the global stage. You see what I mean? So what he says and what I say doesn't have a lot of meaning. It's just an observation. It's the same as if you said. I mean, you have a degree. You know.
No, but there's nothing wrong with you or me saying something. That's why I'm videoing you. Why we're
you
discussing.
could say that, and it would have the same value as him saying it. What I mean is, he's not a deputy. It doesn't just because he says it doesn't mean that the American government has this idea. Now, fair enough. Look,
But
I'll
they're not. But we know they're not going to intervene, don't we? So if they're not going to intervene,
No, but I disagree.
and
with
they're
this
just going to
idea.
send more and more
I
weapons,
disagree with this idea because this
Who's
idea
gonna die?
is that, hold on. This idea is that America is using Ukraine as a proxy war to put down Russia, and fair enough, I understand the point. And America has in its benefit to put down Russia, and the West has in its benefit to put down Russia. I agree with all of that, but, and this is the thing that these people are missing, it's in the benefit of the Ukrainians to put Russia down too. So the Ukrainians chose this situation, and I chose it myself. And Ukrainians who are right now in Ukraine fighting, they chose not to be overcome by Russia, not to have to, obey Russian rule and Russian authoritarian regime. They chose to fight for their freedom and fight for their right to exist as a separate country.
I understand
so I
that,
think
but,
it's,
but how much?
Let me just finish.
Sorry,
I'm
how much
almost done.
fire do you want to
I
put on
promise
it?
I'm almost done. So it's not a question whether or not Ukraine is being manipulated by the West. It's a question of what are the common objectives of the US and of Ukraine. And it just so happens that in this case we have a common objective: to win the war against Russia.
But how many deaths and how much weapons is too much? At what point do you say we're not going to keep providing weapons? I'm just asking you. I'm not making a conclusion. I'm asking you. I'm not.
Question this time, Heiko, because you're saying you're implying that the more weapons are sent to Ukraine, the more Ukrainians will die.
Probably.
And I see your point. I see what you mean there. But Ukrainians would die either way. Ukrainians would be oppressed. There would be grievous prosecutions in Ukraine, grievous political, complete cleansings of political dissidents and of any kinds of pro-Ukrainian ideals in Ukraine. Ukraine would stop existing as a separate country. It would have a complete and utter cultural genocide perpetrated on the Ukrainians in Ukraine. The Ukrainians said, no, we're not going to go that way. We prefer to fight. Some will die, but we will fight for what we have now, for our country, for our ability to say no. We will live by according to our own laws, not according to what Putin forces us to do. You see what I mean? So that's the disagreement we have in this situation. I think the weapons that the West is sending to Ukraine is very good news for the Ukrainians, because they're actually being able to beat back Russia in the northern front, and they're being able to shift the tide of this war in their favor at this moment. I think at this moment the war is going in favor of the Ukrainians. Now I know the Russians have still a lot of troops left, but the Russians cannot produce any more high-tech military. their production sites have closed. Why is that? Because of the sanctions. Because sanctions from countries like Taiwan, for example, do not provide Russia with the high-tech stuff they need to build their high-tech equipment, like tanks and planes. So Russia is being pressed for a lot of different sides, and what Ukraine has to do is to keep grinding down the Russian military machine until it can no longer function cohesively. And as I mentioned with the oligarchs getting killed by Putin, poisoned by his regime, there's already dissidents in Russia right now. Abramovich was poisoned not long ago, and he's one of the richest oligarchs and most famous oligarchs in Russia. You see what I mean?
Yeah, they say he was poisoned. I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know.
we're
I don't
going
know.
a little bit.
Well, I don't. Okay.
I'm pretty sure it's been proven that Abramovich was poisoned, but you can disagree.
I don't know.
And yeah, look, about your opinion of the situation in Ukraine, you're just, taking a bit of a neutral, you're stepping back from it. I actually respect that position. I have nothing against it. I think it's much better to just step back and not do anything about it for people who have these kinds of opinions like yours about the war, than to start supporting the opposite side and to start working against the Ukrainian government. So, either support Ukraine or just stay out of the way. I think that's the best way
Well, I
to
don't support either.
Huh?
I don't support either, but I'm putting a neutral hat today.
It's fair enough.
All right, see you later, yeah?
See you later. But yeah,
Forever. The grass withers, the flower fades. This is Isaiah the prophet. But the word of our God abides forever. Now I'm sure you will agree with me that these flowers are very beautiful. And Solomon, in all his glory, was not arrayed like a lily of the field. Our Lord Jesus Christ said that. Solomon, in all his glory, with all the wealth of his kingdom, was not arrayed like one of these. And yet, Isaiah says, all flesh is grass. All flesh is grass. All beauty, all the glory of man is as the flower. And the grass withers, and the flower fades. But the word of our God endures forever. Surely, Isaiah said, surely the people is grass.
Okay, sit a bit, yeah? Okay, sit a bit.
And Isaiah said, what shall I cry? Isaiah, the prophet, had part of me.
You doing, mate, all right? How you doing? Good. You're back on, yeah? Back on with the machines.
You doing today? Are you doing no speech?
I will be doing Right. So it's like 35 minutes. It's camera corner here.
The word of our God endures forever.
Unfortunately, you see, hear that music in the background. The madness is, if you have this this music in the background, you get like it's not a strike, but you get a telling off from YouTube because there's some copyrighted music in the background, even if it's just random and obscure, barely hearable. Good. You did. So I think that's got enough for today. That's 38 minutes of Speaker's Corner show. Piers Corbyn will be here in a few minutes and I'll be up speaking. So I'm going to call a halt for now. Hope that was entertaining or interesting. I'll see you again next week, Speaker's Corner show. How you doing, mate? All right? So that's the Speaker's Corner show for this week. Tune in, same time, same place next week. About 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, or half an hour or so of the Speaker's Corner show.